You're listening to Let's Talk Creation with Todd Wood and Paul Garner, the creation show where we learn, grow, and worship.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Creation with Todd and Paul. I am Todd Wood.
And I'm Paul Garner.
And we're here in person.
We are.
Together in the same room again.
They're in the same room.
Shocking.
Yes. Not in our usual recording.
No, not in our usual recording.
I was going to say studios.
Studios,
But
yes.
that's far too grand.
Loosely defined, yes, loosely defined. Your dining room
Yes.
and my little cabin.
Your cabin, which I keep calling your shed. It's not really your shed. It's your...
It's a little bit elevated from a shed.
Yes, indeed.
It's got a bit nicer interior than a shed. But yes, it is kind of a little shed. Anyway, we're back here together in Prague. We just saw the Lucy skeleton and a second skeleton we'll talk about here in a second.
Yeah.
It was quite an experience.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to note that this is not, we did not record this episode in cooperation with anyone at the museum over there.
Right. Yeah.
The National Museum here in the Czech Republic made this public exhibition.
Yeah.
And we bought our tickets and took advantage of it. They were very clear that there were to be no photographs in the Lucy exhibit itself.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're hoping that we snuck a camera in there to take some anyway, we did not. So we do not have any photographs to talk about. We can only talk about our own experience. And seeing the Lucy skeleton was pretty exciting.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are to talk about the second skeleton.
Yes.
Yes. So the second skeleton on display is another Australopithecus. It's called Selam. And Selam is an Amharic word. Amharic is one of the languages there in Ethiopia. Ethiopia has many languages, by the way. But Amharic is one of the major ones. And Selam means peace.
I imagine it's etymologically related to shalom.
Which also Hebrews. Yes, exactly. Yeah. They also had the names of both Lucy and Selam there in Amharic. You may have noticed that on the signs. Lucy in Amharic is known as Dinkanesh, which means wonderful thing, wonderful one, one that's wonderful. And so Selam is the second skeleton that they had on display. Now, I don't know about you. I think I was a little bit more excited about seeing Selam than Lucy. You'll find, I'll explain that here in a little bit. Lucy's one thing. I have a cast of Lucy. I'm able to look at the anatomical details of Lucy pretty much anytime I want.
Yeah.
Selam is a little more inaccessible. It got pictures and papers and so forth, but not a lot of detail. So I was really grateful to have the opportunity to see Selam. So thanks again to the National Museum of Ethiopia for making this possible to see these fossils. And of course, to the National Museum here in Prague for hosting this exhibition. And reminding you again, none of them have anything to do with what we're about to say.
This is entirely our responsibility.
This is all our craziness, none of theirs. Okay, there you go. So, So, Paul, you saw Selam. You want to kick us off here with the...
Just a few initial...
Yeah, just a few initial observations. Yeah.
It's very small.
That was my first thought. It's so tiny.
Yeah, and I think we're going to come back to that point again.
We will, yeah.
But it is very small. I mean, I knew far less about Selam than I did about Lucy. You have made the study of hominins a particular focus of your research in a way that I haven't.
Right.
So, I'm sort of broadly familiar with these things, but I haven't gone into the same level of detail that you have.
Sure.
So I didn't know as much about Selam, so maybe that's why you were so excited about it. I suppose I was more excited to see Lucy because I just knew more about Lucy. What did I think? Well, it's interesting, I think, to see a juvenile of Lucy's species.
Yes.
Because you see different things when you look at a juvenile.
It looks
and we go, yeah, it
Yeah,
looks
we'll
different.
talk about that.
So we're going to talk about that. So those are my initial thoughts. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have any photographs of the skeleton because we were not allowed to photograph the skeleton. So I figured we need something, right? And if you've seen Is Genesis History, you know I carry around skulls with me wherever I go. So I did acquire this cast of the Selam skeleton. Nice. Skull, at least.
Nice.
And it is tiny. And that is what I think struck me the most when I walked in to see it, is just how utterly tiny this thing really is. So that's the skull.
I mean, even the skull there just kind of nestles in your hand.
The skull nestles in one hand, but the rest of the skeleton that's on display, the pieces that I've seen pictures of in journals and studied very carefully, and it doesn't really prepare you for the itty bitty scale. It looks like a miniature. Yeah, it looks like a miniature skeleton.
Yeah.
So it was really, really peculiar to see it like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know what I was expecting, but
and delicate little pieces.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
I mean, we'll come back to the preservation again later, but that's kind of extraordinary, really. So,
I want
to talk about this skull.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as we say, it is tiny. But the other thing I want to point out is just how well preserved this is.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the bones here look as if they're present and intact, except a bit of the skull cap. In the exhibit, this top part of the skull, I think, is kind of laying separately.
Yep.
And the other thing that's different in the exhibition is that the cranium and the mandible are kind of separate. They're exhibited sort of separately. Yeah. Whereas here, this model has got them articulated together. And this model actually reflects, as I understand it, the way that they were found.
Yeah.
So the upper and lower jaws in the original fossil were still articulating like this, which is also, I think, quite remarkable.
Really extraordinary in the Hominin record.
The teeth are still there, except for two lower incisors, which are broken off.
Mm-hmm.
Looking underneath the skull, there is a hole.
Yep.
This is the big hole.
The big hole.
Foramen magnum, the big hole. That's literally what it means.
Yep.
This is where the spinal cord sort of passes through. And this particular skull was originally found with the neck bones still intact. So this replica here kind of represents a stage of cleaning after those bones have been removed, separated. Mm-hmm. So the researchers who sort of described this skull said that they noticed some slight distortion, but otherwise, I mean, it is a really remarkably complete specimen.
It is.
The discovery of a lifetime.
Right.
I mean, imagine discovering something like this, as complete as this. And that's quite different from what we actually see with the Lucy skeleton, because famous as Lucy is, it's very fragmentary.
Yeah.
Broken.
The skull is just pieces.
The skull is just pieces. So this is really different. Okay, so now I have seen human skulls, obviously.
Sure.
And I've seen lots of Australopithecine skulls of various kinds, including some from South Africa, as well as East Africa. This looks different even from the other Australopithecine skulls I've seen. So tell me about that.
Okay.
What do you see in this skull?
Yeah, good. So you're right. It definitely looks different from other Australopithecus skulls.
Right.
Most obviously in its completeness.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This is exquisitely preserved in a way that you really only see when you get to something like Homo erectus or, even Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, for example, you might see something like this. But for Australopithecus, this is just very uniquely well preserved.
Yeah.
Now, it is different from other Australopithecus, and it's mostly due, I think, to the age of Selam when it died. So,
Not the geological age.
not
Not
geological age
of
the individual
Right.
when it died. It was in juvenile, right? It was very young, and so the skull changes shape. So if you've ever seen a juvenile chimpanzee skull, for example, it's big and bulbous and round, just like this.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the adult chimpanzee is much more elongated and big snout, and the face grows up around the skull and makes a big
Yeah.
brow ridge. So you've noticed here, there's pretty much no brow ridge.
Yes, I was going to point that out. There's virtually no brow ridge. It's quite, well, I suppose the technical term is gracile.
Yeah, sure is.
Sort of slender and
Yes, thin and delicate.
thin and delicate.
Yeah.
And
So that's one of the things that sets it apart. So how do we know then that this is actually Australopithecus and not something else? Maybe this is a juvenile human.
right. How do you know? If it looks different.
If it looks different, maybe it is. Maybe it is. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, the first thing that I would say to that is, have you seen this thing? It's itty bitty. It's like a little doll.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Yeah.
At that stage of growth, as we'll talk about here in a second, the bones of a human being would not look like this. So this is super tiny.
Yeah.
There's other things that confirm this identity. So one of the things is that it's found, basically the geological context where it's found. So in Hadar, which is in the Afar Triangle in Ethiopia, there are a number of sites that were explored north of the Awash River there, and that's where Hadar is. And there's the Lucy site, which is 288, and then there's another site called 333, which is the site where a number of different skeletal elements were found that together are known as the first family. Then across the river, and I do mean almost literally across the river, is Dakika, which is where this guy was found. Now, it's not exactly the same. It's farther down, but it's part of the same geological sort of system of the localized lake deposits there.
Right.
So it's not exactly even, it's not exactly the same geological age, conventional age, but it's pretty similar.
Yeah.
So that's one clue that tells me we're probably looking at something Australopithecus here.
Yeah.
Again, doesn't prove it. It's not conclusive. It's not the only piece of evidence we have, though. Right?
But it's building a picture.
This is adding to the information.
Yeah.
Next thing, again, as I mentioned, is the size, right? So I think this is so important. So the age of this guy, and this blows my mind. If you do a CT scan of the original fossil, you can see inside of both jaws, the maxilla and the mandible, are adult teeth. So the dentition that you mentioned here, that's nearly complete, barring two broken incisors at the bottom of the, down here on the lower, which you can, the mandible, that dentition is the milk teeth, right? Those are the original teeth, and they're going to be replaced later by the adult teeth. Okay, so you can do even more high-resolution scans. And this is where it gets crazy, because if you do really high-resolution scans, you can actually count the layers of enamel on the teeth.
Is that right?
And the layers of enamel grow in a daily cycle. So the individual layers then can give you the actual age of the individual when it died.
Okay. And what have they concluded here?
Incredible. 861 days old.
to the day,
day.
861
days since it was born.
There's got to be some. Are there error bars on that?
Nope.
Is it
61.
Okay.
It's literally 861.
Okay.
Now that's exactly 2 years, 4 months, 2 weeks, and 5 days. Well, we're going to go with 2.4 years, which is right.
Wow.
So at that age, human children have much larger heads than this skull here. Much larger heads. And frankly, if you've ever held a baby, you know you can't quite, palm a kid's head. It's already quite big, even when it's, a month old or so.
Yeah.
So the fact that this is so tiny already tells you something's fishy going on here.
Yeah.
But we can also then compare, and this is the important part, you compare the actual size of the brain here, which we're going to estimate is basically the capacity of the inside of the skull, which is going to be, we call that the endocranial volume. It's not exactly the size of the brain, but it sort of scales with the brain. And here for Selam, the endocranial volume is about 330 cubic centimeters. Now, in modern human children at 861 days, 2.4 years, the range is about 800 cc's to 1200 cc's, which is mind-blowing at that age that they already have brains that are that big. So this individual is way tinier proportional to the day of development than a modern human being would be. Yeah. So it's not likely to be human as we know it, Homo sapiens. Then there are the other notable characteristics. Because this is so well preserved, we can compare this with other cranial fragments we have from Site 333. Now, you mentioned that we have only pieces of Lucy's skull, which is very true. But we do have other sites in Hadar that have more complete skulls that can give us a sense of what the traits are that we should be looking for that identify this as Australopithecus, particularly Australopithecus afarensis.
Yeah.
All right, so let's look at some of these. First of all, you can see in profile here, if we look at it in profile, you can see that the face already has a pretty pronounced slope to it.
Yeah.
So that's what we call prognathism, right? And so this is characteristic of Lucy species. We also see that the mandible here lacks a chin. It's just rounded around like ours has this chin that juts out. They don't have a chin. That's another characteristic. That's not only found in Australopithecus, but it is found in Australopithecus. Another feature here, and this is very interesting. The bone that goes from the opening of the nose here down to the line of the teeth. You can see, even in this model here, how that bows outward.
Yeah.
And that is characteristic of Australopithecus, particularly afarensis, the East African version of Australopithecus. In South Africa, it doesn't do that. It's more straight. It's bowed out here. So that's a characteristic of afarensis. Another characteristic, the cheekbones, you can see how the cheekbones stick straight out from the side of the face there. In the southern Australopithecus from South Africa, Africanus, it's just a slope from the edge of the teeth out to the cheekbones. Okay. So the cheekbones are different as well. So all of these things are sort of telling us the same story. The geological context, the features that are different from Homo sapiens, different from human beings, and the features that differ from the specimens in South Africa, but that are consistent with other specimens from Hadar. Now, you have to remember here, and this is terribly important, when we find something like Selam here, one of the most important things to do with it is to compare it to other things. And if you have a really good sample to compare it to, you can make more confident statements about what you're looking at. So Australopithecus afarensis here is known from many sites.
Yeah.
And there's a rich fossil record here, probably second only to Neanderthals in the hominin record.
Mhm.
So there's a lot that we can compare this to.
Okay.
We are not just making this up. We are not just blowing smoke. It's not just Lucy's skull fragments and Selam. It is Lucy's skull fragments, Selam, and a bunch of other
load of others.
cranial evidence that also tells us a very consistent story about Australopithecus afarensis.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we've been focusing on the skull. But we know that besides the skull, there were other pieces of Selam skeleton there on display at the museum.
That's right.
Those. And they're also, I mean, that's the other skeletal elements are remarkable too.
I got so excited. I was so excited to see not just how tiny they were, but yeah, they look like the pictures. Which of course they would, because
Of course.
they're real.
Yeah. So we saw both shoulder blades,
Yes.
both of the collarbones,
Yeah.
an intact section of the spine with
Yes.
some ribs attached, although
Which is amazing.
some of the ribs were not on display, I think, because we've seen photographs with more ribs.
Yes.
And I think
So there's been a gradual effort at cleaning and separating out some of the bone.
Yeah. So
You
I
can
think
imagine a spine with a bunch of ribs out of it would be extremely fragile.
yeah.
You
Yeah,
wouldn't
yeah.
want to move that. So
No.
I understand why they cleaned off some of those ribs.
Yeah. So some of those ribs were not on display. Both knees,
Mm-hmm.
the ankle. I mean, this delicate little sort of foot.
As big as your thumb.
Tiny.
Tiny little
Tiny.
thing. I didn't realize. It's so weird to see them in person because you
Yeah.
don't realize. It's just itty bitty.
Yeah, yeah, tiny. And some of these things were so sort of well preserved, so sort of delicate in appearance. So I understand that this is the most complete upper spinal column of any hominin in the fossil record.
Correct.
There are some other fairly complete spinal columns.
There are.
The Littlefoot skeleton.
Yep.
And there's a partial skeleton called STS-14.
Yes. Which preserves the lower part of the spinal column.
Okay. But this one is so
Basically,
complete.
the neck down to the bottom of the ribs.
Yeah,
everything's there and it's all lined up.
Yeah, I mean, amazing.
It's amazing.
With all the ribs. The backbone kind of matches what we see in other partial Australopithecus backbones.
Correct.
It's not like a modern human. It differs from modern humans.
It's different.
Differs from modern apes, for that matter.
That too.
The shoulder blades I was very struck by because they are so well preserved.
Super
Tiny little
They
things.
fit.
Yeah.
Literally, you could cover your hand over one. They're just tiny. Yeah.
Yeah. They love it. And they're quite thin bones. I mean, they're quite breakable.
Yes.
So it's amazing that you've got both sort of intact shoulder blades. One of Lucy's shoulder blades was preserved.
A bit of it.
A bit of it. So the only bit was the part where the arm bone kind of attaches. And there was a bit of that that was preserved. But in Selam, we've got both of these beautiful little shoulder blades preserved intact.
Exquisite.
And let's think about the shape of the shoulder blade, because when you compare Selam's shoulder blade with the shoulder blades of other organisms, it most closely resembles a small gorilla shoulder blade. That's correct?
The shape.
The shape. So it's kind of stout, rounded. Chimpanzees have a different shape. It's kind of long and narrow.
Yeah, they're long and narrow.
So different kind of shape. And in humans, the shoulder joint sticks out to the side.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's different in Selam.
Yep.
The shoulder joint kind of is angled upwards. Which is interesting. Not something you obviously see in modern humans, and there's an obvious reason for it, you might think, which is that she needed to put her arms up to
using her arms to reach
branches and to climb and in the trees.
Yeah.
But this is a point of contention. that there is some debate about this, because some people think that because of these angled shoulder blades, Australopithecus was definitely a tree climber. And that was an important mode of locomotion in these Australopithecus.
Right.
But some other people kind of say, no, her predominant mode of walking, of locomotion was walking, bipedal walking, and the kind of tree climbing is almost a kind of evolutionary leftover.
Right.
Right. So it's kind of a hangover from a tree climbing past. So that's interesting. But it is true that tree climbers do have those angled upwards kind of shoulder attachments, because that mode of locomotion shapes how the skeleton looks, you know. So it's the kind of shoulder blade that you would expect from a hominin like Lucy, other Australopithecines. It's, you know, when you look at it in Selam, it's sort of what you expect. Okay, there's nothing unexpected.
Nothing surprising.
Nothing surprising about it. And again, that's important because, you know, you've told us lots of things about the skull that indicate this is definitely Australopithecus.
Right.
And we see the same thing in the postcranial skeletons.
Same thing.
As well.
Yep.
Same thing.
That's right.
But the knees are interesting.
The knees were very interesting. We may go off script here a little bit, but go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that the
notes here.
The knees look like the knees of an upright biped, walking biped.
A very young upright walking biped.
Yeah.
Is what I was noticing today. Yeah.
Okay. Well, tell me about that.
Well, you know, we talked about the carrying angle of a knee and how when you get older, your femora come toward the center of your body.
Yes.
And so there's this distinct angle. When you put a human femur down on a table, it tilts off to the side. It tilts off the shaft off.
And that's because in an upright walker, the center of gravity, that's
where the center of gravity.
That's where the center of gravity.
Otherwise, you'd paddle back and forth when you walk.
Which is what modern apes do. When you see a modern ape,
that's right,
that kind of walks upright for a short time, it does that kind of strange waddling thing.
Weird, strange waddling.
Yeah.
Now, the knees I saw, I wanted to see the knees because I was just really curious. Well, I was curious about all of it, and I wanted to see all of it, but the knees really stuck out to me because the knees, they didn't have quite such a pronounced angle to them. Right? Now, what makes that interesting, though, is that in juvenile human beings who haven't been walking very long, they also have pretty straight femora. The femurs, the thigh bones are pretty straight on to the shin bone. There isn't an angle like we have. The angle that we get on our knees from actually walking around on two legs. That's where it comes from.
Is that right? So the biomechanics of walking around on
mechanics,
two legs actually shapes
the shape of the femur.
The angle of the femur.
So that's why
interesting.
When we looked at Lucy, even with the bottom of the knee detached, you can still see it's clearly going to angle.
Yeah.
Angle is going to, the shape of the bottom of the femur is angled such that it's clearly going to angle. Yeah. And most important about that is that tells me that Lucy habitually walked on two legs.
Yeah.
That's how you get that angle.
Yeah, right.
And here in Selam, it wasn't nearly so pronounced.
Right.
Which tells me hasn't been walking very long.
Yeah.
Probably still toddling around like a toddler.
Consistent with...
It's 2.4 years old.
Yeah. Consistent with...
Which I thought was pretty remarkable. So, yeah, on the one hand, yes, there's definite evidence of bipedality. It's unquestionably Australopithecus. But on the other hand, they didn't develop that quite to the same extent.
And one thing we didn't say earlier...
The foramen magnum.
But the foramen magnum is right at the base of the skull.
Right.
Not like in modern apes, which kind of angled towards the back of the skull.
Right.
And again, that's because if you're an upright walker, you need to have your skull facing forwards.
So you
on your spine, so you can see where you're going.
There you go.
So the position of the foramen magnum in the skull is another indication, isn't it, of bipedalism. So that's interesting. Got to just mention the foot again. So we had this beautifully preserved foot.
Gorgeous.
And it's tiny.
So tiny.
I don't know much about the mechanics of feet, but it's what you'd expect, I guess, of it.
The shape of the ankle, the way the bones are oriented, the arch of the foot, also would indicate upright walking. All that stuff is consistent with an upright walker.
Okay. Now, there's one other tiny bone, which we haven't mentioned yet.
Super tiny.
Which, again, is incredible.
Extraordinary.
Because it's so rarely preserved.
Yep.
Tell us about that.
Okay, so we've already mentioned how extraordinarily well preserved this thing is. So it was found in sandstone, and as we said, the skull was there, and the upper spine was there, and the ribs were all intact, and the shoulder blades were all there. The arms were missing, so they went somewhere, but the torso was pretty much intact. And as the researchers were cleaning and preparing the neck bones here and sort of separating the skull off from the neck, they found the hyoid bone.
The hyoid. Okay.
Hyoid bone.
You're going to have to explain that.
This is one that, you may not have learned about too much in your high school biology class. The hyoid is a little U-shaped bone that's right here. It's in your neck. It doesn't articulate with other bones. It's essentially part of your voice box. It attaches to muscles of your neck and so forth. Your tongue is attached to the hyoid. The hyoid is important because it's part of what helps you make sounds.
Right.
Now, we're going to have to be real careful here because I know people are going to draw some really firm conclusions here, and we don't want to get carried away with this. But I was really interested to see the hyoid because I'd heard that Selam had a hyoid, and sure enough, there it was.
Yeah.
It was, if you were able to see it, you probably don't have any pictures of it because you weren't allowed to do that, but you might have noticed this weird it looked like a little dimple. And it was not bigger than the end of this pen. It was super small. Well, maybe a little bigger than the other pen.
And interestingly, just as an aside here, the skeletons, both of Lucy and Selam, were kind of laid out there so you could see them. But actually, there were no labels. There were no labels kind of pointing to things and telling you what things were. So unless you kind of knew what you were looking for, this would have completely passed you by. You wouldn't have known what this little bone was.
Now, if you happened to be there on the day we were there, you would have heard us all saying, "Oh, look at this, and look at that piece, and this is how it is here." You could have gotten yourself a mini lecture, but anyway. Yeah. So the hyoid bone.
Yeah.
Absolutely rare in the hominin fossil record. And again, I want to be clear here. This does not prove that Lucy could talk or that Lucy couldn't talk or any of that kind of stuff. This is going to be one of those that's kind of interesting and consistent with things that we've said before, but not conclusive. So, hyoid bones in the hominin record. There's a really good one from a Neanderthal called Kibara 2. That's an exquisitely well-preserved Neanderthal torso with arms intact. And there, the hyoid bone kind of looks like our hyoid bone.
Right.
Which is kind of nice. There's a couple more fragments from another site called Cima de los Huesos. Those are attributed either to Neanderthals or to something called Homo heidelbergensis, which, in my opinion, is probably just another type of Neanderthal.
And that's in Spain?
That's in Spain, yes. Yeah. And as far as I am aware right now, Selam has the only hyoid bone of any Australopithecus.
Right.
So if you're looking for Australopithecus hyoid bone, this is it, right?
Okay.
This is the only hyoid bone.
And these hyoid bones vary somewhat in shape
They do.
and size,
Quite
presumably.
distinctively. Yes.
Quite distinctively. So now I know from past sort of conversations, from reading your sort of published papers in this area, that you think that Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy, and her kin, including Selam, they are not human. They are
Correct.
non-human animals.
Right.
I mean, can we deduce anything about baraminology, which created kinds these things fall into, human, non-human,
Right.
based on the hyoid, because it has this role in vocalization? So can we say anything?
I want to say no. It's more complicated than that. So
It's always more complicated.
it is. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, people have seen this show before. It's always more complicated than you thought. All right. So how is this more complicated? Well, my work is based on many characteristics, hundreds of characteristics of both the skull and the rest of the skeleton.
Yeah.
So to say that, the hyoid bone is some sort of important, one thing, I don't think so. I don't think it's going to say this is obviously not human or it's obviously human. It's a piece of evidence. And we're going to combine it with other pieces of evidence to decide whether it makes sense or whether it's unusual and odd and worth thinking about.
Right.
Okay. So, and I would also say here, even if we could know something about the skeleton of Australopithecus, if we knew a lot about the skeleton of Australopithecus, it still wouldn't necessarily tell us what the hyoid bone shape should be. Right? So I think before this, researchers just didn't know and would have settled with whatever shape the hyoid bone turned out to be. So, yeah, I don't think this isn't a matter of, clinching it for one view or the other, or even being able to say evolution predicts this and it really had that. All we're going to be able to say is that, in my view, the hyoid shape for Selam is consistent with what I've said about Lucy and afarensis in the past.
Yeah. Okay.
Even though we have to be reasonably cautious about this. Like I said, this is the only hyoid bone that we know about, Australopithecus hyoid bone that we know about.
Yeah.
And I emphasize that we know about, right? So there could be some grad student or postdoc somewhere in the lab, as we speak, working away under a microscope, looking at some other hyoid bone that nobody knows about yet. That's possible. I don't know. Who knows? But as of now, we have one Australopithecus hyoid bone.
Sure.
So whatever we conclude from that is just going to have to be, this sample is like this, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So we don't have anything else in Australopithecus to compare it to.
Right.
And it's always dangerous, I think, to come to very firm conclusions based on one trait, one character, the shape of the hyoid bone or whatever it is. People fall into this trap all the time.
We do, yes. And it's so easy to say, well, evolution said this and this is what. Yeah. So let me finish the story of the hyoid bone, which I realized I should have done several pages ago on the script. Whoopsie. So the shape of the hyoid bone, this is how it goes. So in modern Homo sapiens, we have a very delicate, thin hyoid bone. In modern apes, like chimpanzee and gorilla, they have sort of a delicate side, and then right in the middle of the hyoid bone, they have this big cup, essentially.
Right.
It looks like a big giant cup.
Right.
And that is what changes, it contributes to the different sorts of vocalizations that the apes can make versus us, versus Homo sapiens.
Sure.
So it turns out that Selam's hyoid, which I have now confirmed from examining the actual fossil itself, it's a tiny little cup. It looks like a gorilla or a chimpanzee
Yeah.
hyoid bone.
Yeah.
And again, that doesn't mean that she couldn't talk.
Right.
That doesn't mean that she could only screech like a chimpanzee.
Right.
It just means that her hyoid bone most closely resembles
Yeah.
a non-human ape
Yeah.
than it does anything that we would think of as a human
Yeah.
being.
Yeah.
So there you go. But
Yeah.
again, only one. We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know the whole story here. We just know that one fossil looks
Mhm.
more like an animal than it looks like a human being.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's fair enough. I mean, it is exciting to find the hyoid bone because it is so rarely preserved. But
Very exciting.
we can't draw too many conclusions on it. Right.
That's right.
So I kind of touched there on your research on hominins and baraminology, the study of the created
that
kind.
stuff. Yeah.
And so let's kind of riff off that. So did you include Selam in your research, in your published papers in this area?
When we looked at the skeletal elements that we did in 2023 for the ICC,
That's the International Conference on Creationism.
International Conference on
For people who don't
Creationism,
know.
that we did a whole paper on the skeleton, the postcranial skeleton of hominins. So look that up. We'll put that in the show notes.
Sure.
We definitely consulted what we could from Selam. Now, obviously, the first thing we consulted for Australopithecus afarensis would be the Lucy skeleton. We have a cast of that, so that was the go-to specimen for that. But insofar as there were careful photographs and anatomical descriptions published, we use those as well. And it's pretty exciting to be able to see it and to say, yeah, that's exactly what I saw in the photographs. That's exactly how it was described to me. You mentioned the shape of the shoulder blade.
Yeah.
Exactly what I expected it to be. It's just
Yeah.
this round, stout, as you mentioned, like looks like kind of like a itty bitty gorilla shoulder blade. So yeah, we did use it.
Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting. So let's just talk a bit about the preservation.
Sure.
We've already mentioned how remarkable this skeleton is, but let's think about the context. Why is it so remarkable? Given how poorly preserved a lot of Australopithecus material is. So, Lucy, we looked at Lucy, and there are lots of parts there, but they're kind of broken. There are lots of pieces missing.
Yep.
We said it's about 25% complete. So, but here in Selam, we have this intact torso and this incredible skull.
Oh, that's so beautifully preserved.
So we've got basically head, neck, and chest all there.
Yeah.
And those ribs and the shoulder blades and
all articulating still.
yeah, and the collarbones, everything, and much of it found in articulation, including upper and lower jaws.
Yep.
Now all of that suggests there's something strange about her burial and preservation.
Yeah, for sure.
And that is exactly what the her discoverers concluded too. So there was a little booklet which they were sort of handing out, weren't they? And they actually mentioned this. How did she die? And they talk about the fact that she appears to have been buried rapidly shortly after death in a body of water. They believe that she may have been killed by a flash flood. The bones bear no signs of damage from predators or scavengers. Now, they do say this remains, of course, speculation on the basis of indirect evidence.
Sure.
Yeah, we weren't there. We didn't see it. But she is not the only well-preserved skeleton from the same site at Dakika as well. So there are some really well-preserved animals skeletons. So yeah, so something strange happened, and they talk about it being some kind of flash flood. Now, if you're a creationist, you know what happens instantly, as soon as a flood is mentioned, of course, people say, well, was it the flood?
The flood. Oh,
Right. Catastrophic flood. Are we talking about the flood? Now, I think I know what you're going to say here because, I know how we've talked about Lucy and, and so on before, being probably post-flood, after the flood. But what do you think about the circumstances of Selam's death and burial?
yeah. So the first thing I would say was we've got to step back and look again at the geology of the region. So the first thing to remember is Dakika is literally across the river from Hadar, which is where Lucy was found.
Sure.
Barely 2 miles away. So
Yeah.
they are
So close.
They are
Yeah,
so
really
close together.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing to keep in mind. Second thing is the general geology that we talked about with Lucy. The idea that all of the sediments in which these Australopithecus bones are found are sitting on top of the Afar Triangle, which is sort of the northern edge of the East African rift system. And that's a big tectonic spreading center, which we said, well, that's a feature that formed during the flood. Our model of the flood is a tectonic model. And so as the continents are breaking apart and going through this catastrophic tectonic movement, that's when that East African rift system was started. It may have been a slightly post-flood thing. It may have been, during the flood. We don't know. But that's when it started. So the landscape sitting on top of it then is coming after that. It has to come after that.
Sure.
The second thing that we noted was that the deposits where you find these specimens are all highly localized. It's really difficult to trace the layers from one location to another because they're variable.
Right.
So if you look at something, over here and you go 5 miles away, it's going to look different, quite a bit different.
That's very different to what you see in, say, flood sediments in Grand Canyon.
Yes. Where you can look and just, as far as the eye can see, you can trace.
And we trace it not only along the length of Grand Canyon, but I mean, you can trace these things across the continent, and
Yes.
and they're given different names across straight lines and that kind of thing. But they're basically all part of the same sheet.
But it's all the same. Yeah. It's all the same strata in the same order. And that kind of continental extent says you have to have something at least as big as a continent to make it, because you don't get local things that make continent-wide stuff. But when you have very localized sediment layers, then you do have local things that make them, right?
Yeah.
And then you have interspersed in all this layers of sandstone and all the other stuff that you find there, layers of various volcanic material.
Right.
And it's the volcanic material then that you can use isotopic signatures to trace from different locations. So this layer is, well, in conventional years, so many millions of years old, whatever. And so you can tell, okay, this layer over here has the same isotopic signature, must be the same thing. But the important point is they're all coming from local volcanoes that are part of the East African rift system.
Yeah.
So the whole thing looks like sort of a localized, sort of a river / lake deposits that are forming, sitting on top of a feature that was formed by the flood. So all that tells me this is a post-flood environment in which we're finding these fossils.
Yeah.
Next thing that we pointed out with Lucy was the stone tools that were made from localized volcanic rock that were found at a site called 894.
Right.
Here with Dakika, we have something a little unusual. We have some animal bones with cut marks on them. But we don't have stone tools that made the cut marks. So that's curious. But that, again, would, I think, be consistent with the notion of a local flood. Because a local flood, you would expect to sort bone differently than heavy stone tools. So I would kind of not be surprised that you would find
But the bones have become separated.
Bones separated from the tools that
Stone
compose.
tools, yeah.
So,
Yeah. But if you are making stone tools from the local rock, I mean, this kind of fits the post-flood context. There's not time during a flood, I guess, to be,
and if you've got,
excavating volcanic rock and then making tools and
even if you don't have the tools, you still have cut bones. Somebody is out there cutting these bones.
yeah.
Right. And so that doesn't really speak of the catastrophic conditions of a flood.
Right.
So I don't really doubt the researchers when they're telling me that Selam was buried in a catastrophic flood.
Mm-hmm.
I have lots of reasons to doubt that it was the flood.
Yeah. The flood,
It seems like it's very obviously a flood that happened later.
Yeah.
Much more narrow
Yeah.
in extent.
Yeah.
And I think the proximity to the Lucy side also speaks to the same thing, right? So with Lucy, you have a highly fragmented skeleton, pieces broken all over the place,
Mm-hmm.
a skull that's in pieces.
Mm.
And that's 2 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
It's not exactly the same level. Takika's farther down in the stratigraphic record than Lucy, but it's the same geological stuff, right? It's the same geological context.
Yeah.
All localized deposits there.
Yeah.
So if there's extraordinary preservation of Selam at Takika on the south side of the river and really rough, broken up preservation of Lucy on the north side of the river, that seems to speak of a very localized nature of whatever buried Selam.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that sounds all very similar to what you said in previous Lucy episodes that we did, where we talked about that. And it all sounds very reasonable to me. So we've got this landscape that's formed during the flood. We've got this tectonic, sort of major tectonic event that has formed this junction of these plates.
Rift system, yeah.
And this rift system. And then we've got these highly localized deposits sort of sitting on top of all of that. So the idea that this was some kind of local event, local flood, rather than the flood, makes sense, because the global flood, I mean, was a massive catastrophe. It basically resurfaced the whole of the planet in a very short period of time. And of course, a catastrophe of that magnitude doesn't just kind of switch off. It's not like you turn a switch at the end of the flood and everything just goes back to normal. It's not like the children's storybooks.
Correct.
Where Noah comes off the ark and the water's receding. It's all lovely.
Rainbow.
No. If we've understood the flood correctly, there are going to be probably several centuries where you have a recovery period.
Yeah.
Where you have major climatic changes and tectonic sort of upheavals, and the volcanism is sort of declining, and there's going to be all sorts of major things going on. We talked about that in the After the Flood series, which we did recently. We talked about some aspects of that. So you look here today at the Afar Triangle, Hadar and Dakika and so on, is a hot and dry environment.
Yes.
There's not much rain.
No.
But when you look at the geological record, at the time these things are being buried, you have evidence of this really quite large sort of lake system that has deposited these sediments, these sandstones and mudstones and so on. And so you get this sense that from the time when these things are buried, that local environment has changed pretty dramatically. There have been some really, really big changes, and that kind of fits with the sort of recovery period after the flood that we're talking about. We are talking here about sometime in those early centuries post-flood. It's not the global flood.
Correct.
We've transitioned to this much more regional, localized kind of context, but we're not quite at the modern world yet.
Right.
It's in that transitional period.
It's in that transitional period, and that makes sense, right? It makes sense that a big flood would not just screech to a halt so that everybody could go back to their lives.
Right.
It makes sense that there would be then localized
Yeah.
climate change, quite dramatic climate change over the history of humanity.
Yeah.
And then when you see all this evidence of local catastrophe,
Yeah.
it all comes together. It's like, it's consilient. The different parts of...
Conciliant, that's a great word.
That's a great word.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know what consilient means, just in case you don't, consilient is when you have an idea, a theory, or a model that explains lots of different pieces that you would never expect to all connect together. That's consilient.
Yeah, but they all come together and kind of converge on there's one main explanation. Yeah. That's the
So let's just wrap this up then.
Yeah.
It's just an amazing thing. It's been really amazing. I cannot say how grateful I am to have had the opportunity to see all this at the museum. It was such a really startling blessing, I think, to be able to experience this here.
Yeah.
So I am very grateful to both museums for making this exhibit possible.
Indeed.
It's exciting stuff. And no, it's not a religious pilgrimage for me, but it was a pretty good deal to be able to actually see this stuff in person and confirm, yes, there's the hyoid bone. I can see it. It's a little cup, tiny little cup.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're very grateful to the Nehemiah Foundation, of course.
Absolutely. The Genesis Fund at the Nehemiah Foundation provided the funding. So everybody who's ever made a contribution there, thank you so much.
Yeah. Made this trip possible.
They made this trip possible. So all of these episodes, we owe a big thank you to them as well. And we're so grateful. And of course, I always like to, think about all the wonders of creation that have been discovered. I mean, I finished grad school in 99. I got my doctorate in January of 99. And the Kika discovery was made after that.
Yeah.
So was Homo naledi, Denisovans, Sediba, all of these remarkable things that we have found since then just fill us with awe. They fill us with wonder at the grandeur of God's creation.
Yeah.
And make me want to study more and learn more.
Yeah.
So you students out there, hey, there's who knows what else is out there waiting for us to discover it.
There's more to find.
There's much
more to find. I didn't know at the outset of this episode, I didn't know that much about Selam.
Yeah.
And I feel I've learned a lot more.
Yeah.
Now. And I hope, our viewers feel the same way, that, they've got a real insight into this little thing.
It's a lazy dinkinesh.
Yeah.
It's a little one.
And I can't help, in my imagination, just trying to visualize this little animal and its life.
Yeah.
And how it met this sort of untimely end.
The reconstruction at the museum was a little more hairless than I think he probably was, or she probably was. Yeah. Made it look a little more human. I don't think so. I think you would have known.
Yeah.
That is some weird animal coming at me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I can't help trying to visualize, Selam in life. Yeah.
Selam in life. All right. Well, that is Selam.
Yeah. So in our next episode, we're still going to be in the Czech Republic.
We are.
But we are actually heading away from Prague.
We're traveling.
We're hitting the road. So where are we going? Well, we're not going to tell you. You're going to have to tune in next time and find out.
It's a surprise.
It's a surprise. But it's interesting because the topic that we're going to be talking about in our next episode is not one that you will find commonly addressed on YouTube. I mean, you'll find loads of stuff online about Selam, Lucy, and so on. But this next topic, I think, is rather special because not so many people talk about it. Nope. And it's really interesting. It's really fascinating. Yeah. So this will break some new ground and for the podcast too. So join us in 2 weeks' time to find out what the mystery is.
See you then.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Creation. For more information, visit us at letstalkcreation.org, where you'll find an archive of past episodes and all our show notes. If you'd like to leave a comment or make a suggestion, you can find us on all the major social media platforms. Let's Talk Creation is brought to you in the U.S. by Core Academy of Science and in the U.K. by Biblical Creation Trust. As a listener-supported ministry, we are grateful for all of your financial support. Find out how you can make a contribution at our website, letstalkcreation.org. Also remember to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends. Thanks, and see you next time.